I'm wondering about two solutions for international conflict. In the case of Ukraine, I would like to see Ukraine have ironclad guaranteed neutrality. They would not join NATO, but they would be free to do commerce and diplomacy between the West and Russia. And that would, I believe, take the pressure off Russia, but also guarantee stability within Ukraine. And also, perhaps we could go to status quo ante as of 2014. Now, regarding the territories that are occupied, they could be autonomous territories. That would depend on the negotiations. In respect to Israel, I would like to see a two-state solution. This would be guaranteed by the IDF, also the Middle Eastern powers, and also Western powers that could supervise this, as well as personnel from the United Nations. I think that these would be two two solutions. And the third thing, I believe we really have to emphasize world government. As long as the balance of power exists, you're going to have these conflicts that are going on ad infinitum. And also, I would like to recommend for the audience the book I Choose Peace by Connie Zoliakis. He was a Labor MP and also member of the League of Nations Secretariat. And his writings are very important at this time. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I I agree with many of your recommendations. I think, given that NATO expansion is what triggered this war, I think it's quite obvious that restoring neutrality has to be the solution. Now, obviously, it's problematic in Ukraine because after this huge war with so many people dying, it's going to be now, unlike in the beginning of the war, much more difficult to have restored this neutrality, because it can't only be official neutrality from NATO, but it also have to be avoiding de facto NATO membership by having all these Western troops and weapon system placed on the Russian borders. And indeed, on the first day after we toppled the government in Ukraine, when the CIA and MI6 began to move in and establish these 12 CIA bases along the Russian borders, all of this has to go. So I think also the main goal should be to, I'm also a big advocate of a sovereign, independent Ukraine, but we also have to be, it has to be based on the model of Mexico. And Mexico has the freedom to have any foreign policy it wants. It can have any economic and diplomatic ties it wants. The US doesn't put restriction, but we also have to be honest with ourselves that Mexico doesn't have the freedom to join a military or Russian military bloc, that this would not be accepted any more than the US would have accepted Russian nukes in Cuba. It's just not going to happen. So I think the problem is that often when we talk about peace in Ukraine, the reason why we dismiss diplomacy negotiation is it's always denounced as, well, we're not going to give away Ukrainian territory. That's unacceptable. But it's worth noting that in the beginning of 2022, the agreements between the Russians and Ukrainians to end the war before the intervention by the Brits and Americans had nothing to do with the territory. The Russians accepted to withdraw back where they had been. And the only thing they insisted was neutrality. But once that was taken off the table and we decided for war instead, of course, now it is a territorial dispute. So I think any solution now has become so much more complicated because restoring neutrality would be one thing, but now again it's become a territorial dispute. In terms of Israel, I also agree. I think the two-state solution is really what is required, but I'm not sure if it's even possible anymore, given all the settlements on Palestinian land. And this is also not really an anti-Israeli argument. I think Israel has made a huge mistake because it insisted on, it's been pushing for one state, rejecting a Palestinian state. And this is a crisis because the territories which now attempt to be ruled by Israel, effectively Greater Israel, is now only 50% Jewish, about 7.5 million. Now, how do you create an ethno-state in Greater Israel? If you're not even majority, it becomes very difficult. You can't have liberal democracy, it becomes apartheid. You have to rule over certain who are denied basic rights. You can pursue ethnic cleansing, which is happening in Gaza, but overall, I don't think it's. I think this is eating away at the soul of Israel as well. This is, I think, for too many years they didn't have to make any compromises because they had the collective West behind them, and I think, yeah, now they're really stuck in a corner. So. I'm not sure if a two-state solution is possible anymore. Possible, but I don't really see any other solution unless they give up on the whole idea of an ethno-state. And I don't. I'm not very optimistic about that prospect either. But yeah, I don't have any good solutions to Israel, and unfortunately, this is part of the problem.
Yeah, I just want to say one quick comment in that regard. It's that when our members of Congress go to Israel, they don't meet with grassroots peace organizations that are working very hard for healing in Israel-Palestine. And I wish they would meet with those people. We have